Hey, what's up guys? Nate here for Sonic Academy. Today we're going to be taking a look at Sonic Academy's brand new Kick 3 kick synthesizer, but we're going to be taking a look at a few different ways that you could leverage Kick 3 outside of the usual kick drum design. Let's dive in and we're going to take a look. Right, so despite its name, Kick 3 is actually pretty adept at synthesizing a whole bunch of different percussive sounds. Everything from toms, which, is pretty similar to kick, but you can go right up to stuff like hats and snare drums as well. Now, let's take a look at an example here. We're going to synthesize a snare inside a Kick 3 quickly. We'll just hit the initialize preset here, and this is what we currently have. Now, snares are typically sort of split into two different components. You've got a sort of noise component, which is in the real world, the physical modeling side of things. That's that's the sort of springs under the skin of the snare, and then the snare itself actually has quite a lot of with the actual snare without the springs underneath. It has quite a lot in common with the kick as well. It does have this sort of sine wave thud to it. Right, so what we're going to do here is pretty much do a sine wave like we have for the kick. Except we are most likely going to have this quite a bit shorter. Something like that. And we're also not wanting to go down as low as what you normally would with a kick. Potentially something a little bit more zappy like that, but we might even somewhere around there. We'll dial that in as we get the noise layer built in here. So let's head over to our second layer here and we can bring in a click. If we're going to do something like a 909 kind of snare drum, something just like some plain white noise would work for this. There's actually in Kick 3 a noise section here, which we can come load in some noise. Bunch of different noise samples. Let's go with just this plain old white noise sample that we have here. Okay, so let's play around with the amplitude for this. We want to just kind of make this a little bit more snappy. And then our sub layer, we want to just play around with this a little bit more. Probably bring that down a little bit there. There we go. Somewhere around there is good for me, and then we can also tweak the amp. Don't want too much of that snap coming through, so that's sounding pretty good now. Shorten this. Cool, there we go. Now we're starting to get the makings of sort of a 909 snare. Of course, we've got more layers that we can put in here, so we could play around with the other stuff as well. Let's bring in another click and perhaps go back to that noise section again. There was, that's actually quite nice. I like that, a little bit of the crackle on that one. Let's trim this down slightly. Tighten that up a little bit. And let's also just... There we go. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of effects in Kick 3 as well, which does assist us with sort of shaping our snare tone a little bit more too. We can come in here and perhaps assign all of these to an effect like the tube. And maybe just drive this a little bit. Perhaps even add some compression. And you can even do stuff like add in a reverb too if you want. Maybe just filter this one and we'll find something short. I like that. There we go. And then lastly, we could then shape this further as well with our EQ. There you go. So pretty easy to design different percussion sounds. Pretty much any percussive sound that you could think of, most likely be able to do it with Kick 3. Now another thing with Kick 3 is a lot of the parameters have automation assignments to them as well. So using Kick 3 now is pretty viable for creating sort of build-ups and things. Let's use Bitwig's note repeat function. And we'll switch this over to Euclidean. We'll make sure that we have the density at full. But we're going to then assign some accents. So we'll do less accents in the lower velocity, come down a little bit. Right, so we need to enable some velocity sensitivity inside of Kick 3 as well. You can come over to the settings page here and we'll just dial the velocity up. You're getting a little bit more of an interesting kind of feel with this now. Let's bring the count maybe down for this. Cool. And we'll just stick a note in here so we can kind of drag this across. And let's bring this all the way over to 9. So now, of course, you can play around because we've got our snare with synthesized components as well. So we could even leave the noise alone and perhaps automate something like the sort of pitch, the overall pitch for this. And let's just enable the automation in Bitwig, bring this down and do something like so. We can also play around with the length too. And let's bring that all the way up. We'll just shorten this whole thing, I think. Don't need such a long build-up for this one. And we've currently got this linked. We could actually do these separate for each component as well. Just unlink this. So now we actually have control of the length of both of them separately. And let's maybe take on noise. This one we can also automate as well. Pretty cool. You can get some sort of nice little riser effects going on there. Of course, this applies to things like the effects as well. We could do some additional movement with that, and maybe even add in some filtering on the main as well. We'll add in the multi-filter. And we'll also bring the mix up for the reverb. And there you go, some pretty interesting little snare rolls and stuff. You could do all sorts of like little effects risers and things, particularly percussive ones, and then add in some additional interest just by automating some of the parameters inside of Kick 3. Right, so I've been able to do this with Kick 2 before as well, but there's a lot more control over this, and that's using Kick 3 as a bass synth. You can get some pretty nice tight bass sounds, all kind of distorted 808 sounds that are key tracked. It's pretty easy to do that with Kick 3 as well. Once again, we'll just go and initialize this preset here. We want to kind of keep like a bit of a click in the beginning, but the tail section of our kick is essentially going to be a flat pitch. So we can kind of come down and tune this to maybe C1 or something like that. You want to make sure that these are both C1 on either side. The easiest way to do that is going to be to turn the snapping on so that you can just quickly grab. There you go. They're going to be the same pitch as it comes down. So you're going to have the initial snap from the pitch bend, and then you've got your sustained note after that. Let's come up an octave as well so you can hear better. Now the trick here is to turn on the key tracking. Play around with the snap here in the beginning a little bit as well. Or maybe keep it a little bit darker like that. And let's see, we want to extend our amp out, so we're going to make sure that the length is kind of at its max. You can't loop this, but you can have a nice long section like this, and then you can also set this to gate. So another nice thing to play around with here is the harmonics. We can select which harmonics we want here and just dial up the addition of some. What we're essentially doing is adding an additional sine waves higher up the frequency spectrum here with this. And this is going to be useful for sub sounds like this, because quite often a single sine wave lower down is going to get lost in your mix. Having higher up harmonics like this is, especially on smaller speakers, you'll be able to hear the tonality of this a lot better. Cool. You got a bunch of presets that you could play around with here too, right up to actually getting square waves. There's a saw wave from this. But I think this is most useful when you're looking for those kind of subtones. Another useful thing is you can actually use the selective pitch tracking here. If you don't want this initial one to shift up with your key tracking, so you want to keep this at that pitch, but you only want to change the pitch, we can turn on the selective key tracking and just choose our sort of stable pitch loop here that we have. Now it's only going to be pitching up this section and not the initial attack. It'll always be the same at the attack of the kick. So it's subtle in this case, but if you want to do that and maintain that sort of initial sort of pitch bend that you have there without pitching that up along with everything else, you can do that using the selective key tracking. And of course, the effects come into play once again. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do from filtering to, I don't know, more extreme effects like this brassifier, for example. Quite dirty, that one. Quite like the Brit Crusher and stuff like this too. And of course the tube is really nice too. And lastly, wave shapers are always great for this kind of content too. Oh, nice. Pretty cool. Really nice solid sub bass for you there from Kick 3. So the last thing I'm going to look at here is actually using Kick 3 as a kind of enhancer for existing drum breaks that you may have. I'm just going to bring in Kick 3 again and we'll start from scratch. This time around though, what I'm going to do is actually bring in an audio channel and let's just find a break beat here. Take something like this break. Doesn't even need to be set up to the tempo. What we're going to do here is just loop this. And we're going to use Kick 3 to kind of just give some accents to certain characteristics within this break. What you're going to need to do this is to just set up the sidechain input. So we're going to bring the sidechain, we'll just go from pre into Kick 3. And then let's load up the Kick 3 interface here. So what we can decide to do is to focus in on certain frequencies and then trigger sort of accents on top of that. So maybe let's look at something like the snares first. We can do multiple instances of Kick 3 and look at different areas as well. So let's just let's first just initialize this once again and maybe just add in like a little bit of either a click. We'll take out the sub here, for example, and then let's bring in a kick and we'll bring in some white noise, and then we may bring in just sort of like an accented click as well. So we've got kind of like a nice stereo bit of white noise to add to the snares. And let's say maybe we want to just bring in a little bit of a click somewhere. Something like that, just kind of really tighten up the snares from this quite an old sounding break. Maybe we want to just modernize this slightly. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come over to trigger. We're going to turn on our triggers here. And then we're going to kind of focus it in on a sort of area where we want to trigger our sounds. Now this is just going to happen live. We don't even need to program any MIDI notes or anything like that. We can just start playing this back. And you can see we've got some audio coming in now on these threshold here. The filter's affecting this too. If you bring this down, you'll start to see the kicks kind of filter in more. We're trying to find the sort of mid-range content to give a little bit of a snap to some of the snares, for example. Let's see what happens when you bring this threshold down. We're just catching the snares now. So let's listen to with and without. So this is without. Now let's enhance those snares a bit. Stands out way more now. So it's kind of almost like a transient designer, but we're actually adding in content to this. It's more stereo, the noise sample that we're using, and we could kind of use this as a drum replacer with any sample that we want. If we bring in just a snare, for example, and let's decide we like that one. We can just come back to the main here and drag our snare into a new layer. We'll load this as a click file, and now this snare is going to trigger on top of our drum break at any given time. And like I said, you can also split this up into various different components. So if we were to add in another kick 3, for example, and let's just load up a preset here with this one. So we're going to kind of add some nice sort of subbiness to this break as well. Once again, come to the trigger here. We want to make sure that this is also triggering from the break. We're going to go pre once again. This time around, let's bring the filter right down. And we're going to be really honing in on the kicks here. Filter this even more. There we go. Maybe dirty that up slightly. And we'll tighten up the amp envelope slightly. Cool. So now we can actually kind of just stick all of these together, maybe treat them all as one. We can just use Sonic Academy's SA76 for this. Yeah, so now we've gone from this to this. Cool, so there you go. A couple of different ways that you can utilize Kick 3 to synthesize percussion, tweak your drum sounds, and just create some interesting content with all of the new features provided within Kick 3. Really cool updates. Go check it out at sonicacademy.com. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll catch you soon. Cheers.